On today's edition of The Front Row, we are at the Silent Wings Museum out on Interstate 27, just adjacent to the Preston Smith International Airport. And our special guest is the curator of the museum, Sharon McCullough. Sharon, welcome back to The Front Row. It's always a pleasure to have your company.
It's always good to have you out.
Well, you've got a fabulous exhibit going on at the moment. I know it's been up a while. Lots of people have seen it. You had a lot of school folks come through, a lot of field trips and things like that. For the general public, tell us a little bit about it. It has to do with maps. Is that right?
Yeah, we titled it Unfamiliar Territory, Military Maps of the American Glider Pilot, because I selected a number of maps from the collection of the Silent Wings Museum that really speak to where the glider pilots were coming into and what was happening on the way in. There's a lot that has to do on what happens on the ground after they land their glider, but there is a tremendous amount of planning and preparation that goes into being ready to fly that mission, and these maps speak to the planning and the preparation and then the actual accomplishment of that flight in, under tow, under fire, behind enemy lines. So there are several maps in this exhibit that speak to either the preparation experience or the experience of actually getting there and getting on the ground.
Right. So we should probably do a little bit of context here. This is the late 1930s, 1940s, I guess?
Yes, the glider program was active between late 1941 until about February, March of 1945. They stopped the training process because the last major mission occurred in March of 1945. And so the glider program was very, very active and a going thing during World War II between 42 and 45.
So there's lots of generations of us who really have no idea how this works because we're used to GPS and our phones and all of that kind of thing. These are drawn maps.
Yes.
Trying to figure out the lay of the land, literally, right?
Exactly, and one of the maps in this exhibit is indeed the lay of the land with no markings on it, no geographic area's name, no city's name, not even the area that they're flying into. It's an outline of the coastline and some specific information about initial points and checkpoints and where their formation is going to turn and at what altitude and what speed. And there's a lot of supporting documentation, but the map itself is very sparse. It just shows a coastline and where those landing zones are inland of that coastline. And so the glider pilots have to take quite a bit of college level training to understand how to read those maps and how to use them effectively. And their tow pilots are doing the same thing because they're at the front of the tow rope.
Right.
But the glider pilots have to understand that map just as much as their tow pilot because they are coming into that territory and they're the ones that are going to have to make a landing in that territory.
Right. And just to get the middle picture in our listener, this is the Silent Wings Museum about gliders. So when you say a tow pilot, that means a powered aircraft pulling a glider. The glider is released and lands in a specified place, right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, and they have to have maps to do that.
And they have to have maps to do that. And they have to have maps to understand that experience later on. And so a couple of these maps are more about the glider pilots getting together and then marking a map of an area as it appeared in 1944, but they're marking it in the 1980s, and they're putting very special notations on as to where they landed, who in the Dutch resistance helped them, how many days they were in the basement of a barn, and they marked a couple of them with some really specific information that speaks more to what that experience was like. So they have a combination of maps that help them prepare for their mission and accomplish their mission, and then a couple that are really specific to what actually happened on the ground before they were able to get out.
Right. Okay. So if I'm a visitor to the museum and I come out here and I say I want to see the Silent Wings current exhibition on maps, what will I see and what should I do?
Just come to the front desk. They'll take care of your admission fee. Right. But the exhibit is included. All the exhibits are included in that one admission fee. So you'll come in and tell them you want to see the whole Silent Wings Museum. But the Unfamiliar Territory exhibit is actually in what we call our timeline gallery, which has some permanent content in it related to the timeline of World War II and glider operations, and a very large map that orients you to what was happening and where those glider operations took place. And then the Unfamiliar Territory exhibit is right in the middle of the museum, right in the middle of the action
Right.
for all the other exhibits in the timeline gallery.
Right. So, just for somebody who's interested, was there a specific area where gliders were routinely used? Was there a part of the European theater where that was particularly adept for glider usage?
They utilized CG-4A gliders to bring in men and equipment all the way they flew out of North Africa to come into Sicily. They flew out of Italy to come into southern France. They flew out of England to come into northern France in the Normandy area. And then flew into Holland, flew into Belgium, and flew into Germany.
Oh,
so the
everywhere.
entire European theater, plus major operations in Burma and Philippines and New Guinea, used some CG-4A gliders, fewer than they were used in the European theater, but there are gliders that were crucial to operations in Burma, the Philippines, and New Guinea during the Pacific War as well.
Wow, gracious. How many gliders were there, do you think?
There were almost 14,000 built. 13,909 is the official number. About maybe 6,000 of them or so were shipped overseas to either the Pacific Theater or the European Theater to be used in operations. They kept back 4,000 or 5,000 of them, give or take, to used in training operations, like the ones that took place at South Plains Army Airfield here in Lubbock and other locations across the United States. So about half of them ended up overseas, and about half of them ended up here in the United States to be used for training.
Wow. How many of them survived?
Well, there are 7 full restorations left in the world. There are two or three of those are in Europe and were salvaged gliders that were actually shipped to Europe and were used in operations. The ones here in the United States are ones that didn't ever get shipped and stayed in the United States. But they all symbolize that overall service. So there are 7 CG-4A gliders left in the world. We have one of the fully restored ones, and then quite a few partials and components here at the museum.
Right. If you went on this mission, what were the chances that you would survive and live to tell about it?
They tend to call that an attrition rate. It's a fancy term. The basic thought was that they would probably get a 35% casualty rate from the gliders because the landings were going to be rough.
Yeah.
The flight in was going to be rough with flak and artillery fire. It actually did better than that. The gliders, the CG-4A glider is pretty tough, and if they can get it landed fairly well and not crack it up too badly,
Right.
the men and equipment inside can come out of that glider and be ready to do what they need to do. The men are wearing seatbelts because it is a rough ride.
Yeah.
All of the equipment is either chained down or tied down, so it's all secured inside that cargo area. So given a fairly viable landing, they didn't lose as many men or equipment as they thought they might with some rough landings. So it's a pretty tough little glider.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Right. Well, so you have currently the map exhibit. I can't remember the name of it.
Unfamiliar territory.
So you have the current exhibit going up. What are your plans for the future?
We try anyway, to do a new featured exhibit every year. So the current Unfamiliar Territory will close at the end of April this year. And then in time for our D-Day event, the weekend closest to June 6th, this year is June 7th and 8th. So in time for that D-Day event, we will have next year's featured exhibit installed, which is, I'm not going to tell you the title of it yet,
Okay.
because I want to be a surprise, but it's centered around toys and games that the glider pilots or their families would be familiar with, and it's centered around what they were learning from those toys and games. What values were they trying to inculcate? What type of skill sets were they trying to develop in young children to help them understand how to function with their families on the home front, to help them understand what was happening in the world. And so the toys and games in the exhibit for next year will concentrate on that and how people are learning how to process what's happening during World War II and what their role is in that.
Right. Okay. Well, I hope you'll invite me back when it's time for that to go up. In the meantime, there is so much to see. You have, as you know, several just sort of permanent displays on. Give us a little rundown about those for people who might want to come out.
Sure. Our core exhibits tell the story of the training and experience of the American glider pilots. So through our core exhibits, you will get a good idea of what the training experience was like, the aircraft they were flying, some of the concepts that they were needing to learn. And some of those core exhibits, I change materials in them to illustrate different concepts within that. And in the combat gallery, you'll get, I hope, a very good picture of what that experience was like flying in, on the ground, functioning with the glider infantry, and what the particular tools and equipment and knowledge that the glider pilots were using to accomplish their mission. We have an introductory film that gives you a very good overview of what that experience is like and what you're about to see in the exhibits. And then our core exhibits cover as many aspects of that as possible, and they change periodically to bring out different parts of that experience.
Right. And you have the fully restored glider.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Take a peek inside a CG-4A glider that has all its parts,
Right.
and is our flagship of our collection.
Right. Right. Not only you have some other things as well. You have part of a Jeep, I think, and some other things.
We have a couple Jeeps. One of them's tucked right inside the CG-4A glider, all tied down and ready to go. We have a 75 millimeter howitzer, which fits inside the glider. The crawler retractor that is an overload but fits in the glider. We have a training aircraft, a little training glider, and a little L-Bird. It's a light aircraft that was used during that training process. And all throughout the museum, just artifacts that speak to that experience, little bits that tell you about the whole.
Right. Right. All right. That's what there is to see here at the Silent Wings Museum. Our special guest on the show today, Sharon McCullough, who is the curator of the Silent Wings Museum. Sharon, as always, thank you for your time. Thank you for telling us all about the activities here at the museum.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.